Stop treating this pick like some small draft detail. The Chargers slammed the table, took Akheem Mesidor in the first round, and sent a message to the rest of the AFC. Herbert needs help, yes, but this defense needed venom too. Harbaugh called the trio fire. Ortiz said it's lit. And I'm going to press both sides of this move without letting anybody off easy. Subscribe right now because today we've got defense, pressure, and real accountability. Let's start with what this pick actually means. Now let me be straight with you. I like the aggression, but nobody here is going to pretend the other half of the conversation just disappeared. Mesidor fixes a real need. After losing Odafe Owe, the Chargers needed another quarterback hunter. They needed rotation help. They needed somebody who can line up with Khalil Mack and Tuipulotu without turning the pass rush into some tired third-quarter gamble. That's January football. That's a roster trying to wreck an opponent's offensive plan before it can even breathe. But here comes the pressure, and it has to be loud. Justin Herbert was sacked and hit 129 times last season. 129. That is not some footnote stat. That is an alarm screaming inside the building. That image from the Patriots game, with Khalil Chason and Elijah Ponder twisting Herbert, forcing the ball loose and leaving our quarterback on the ground, still needs to bother everybody wearing that Chargers shield. You cannot build a win-now team and accept your franchise quarterback paying a toll on every dropback. Tyler Biadasz is in at center. Cole Strange is in at right guard. Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater are coming back from injury. Fine. That improves the picture, but it does not finish the job. The left side inside is still sitting there. They need a guard who can step in, anchor, move bodies, protect Herbert's vision, and kill that feeling that the play might blow up before it even starts. That is why day 2 of the draft is not a luxury anymore. It is a responsibility. Chase Besantis, Emmanuel Prednion, Jennings Dunker, Jalen Farmer. Those names are not just nice options on a list anymore. They are possible answers to the most brutal part of the equation. And Ortiz already tried to get ahead of the pressure, saying this is a deep class, that there will be linemen available in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th rounds. Great, then go get one. Because when the general manager and Harbaugh admit they talked about this before the press conference, they are also admitting they know exactly where the fan base is looking. The Mesidor pick raises the ceiling of the defense, no doubt. But it also raises the responsibility of the next move. If the Chargers are really in win-now mode, they cannot fix the pass rush and leave Herbert exposed in the middle of the storm. The first round brought power. The second round needs to bring protection. And now we get to the part that already started splitting the fan base before Mesidor even puts on a Chargers helmet. The guy has barely landed in Los Angeles and people are already making faces because of his age. 25 years old is a rookie in 2026. Yes, that matters. Yes, it stands out. But let's stop acting like it erases the player on tape, because at that point, the analysis turns into lazy panic dressed up as concern. The Chargers are not picking in a vacuum. This team is not building a time capsule for 5 years from now. The window is open with Justin Herbert. Khalil Mack is still Khalil Mack. Tuipulotu is already becoming a real piece, and Jim Harbaugh is trying to turn physicality into an identity. In that context, an older prospect, a more battle-tested prospect, a guy closer to NFL-ready contact, can be exactly the kind of swing that makes sense. Mesidor does not need to show up as a 3-year project. He needs to show up useful. Now, on Sundays, in the rotation, on 3rd down, on the snap where the opposing offense thinks it survived the first punch. And there is one detail I am not treating like decoration. John Harbaugh, head coach of the Giants, reportedly viewed Mesidor as a top 10 player in the draft, according to a Chargers post and later confirmed by Jim Harbaugh. Can you make the joke that the brother was just being nice? Sure. But you can also see the bigger point. NFL people look at Mesidor and see high-end talent, not some lukewarm late first-round pick. If he were 22 instead of 25, this conversation probably looks totally different. And a lot of the same critics would be complaining that the Chargers had no chance to get him at 22. The concern is obvious. A lot of his wins at Miami came against guards. A lot of his power showed up inside. And now the question is how it translates to the league. Fine, fair question. But who better to sharpen that than a room with Mack and Tuli? Mesidor can start by eating with what he already does well, attacking inside, using power, wrecking protections, while he builds out the rest of his pass rush bag. Tuli came into the league with things to develop too, and now nobody talks about him like a problem. So no, I am not jumping into the automatic panic line. Age matters in the draft, but readiness matters too, and for a Chargers team trying to win before this window gets more expensive and more crowded, Mesidor may be less risky than people are trying to sell. He might be the kind of rookie who does not ask for permission. He shows up, kicks the door open, and forces the fan base to change its mind fast. But Mesidor's arrival does not stop at celebrating the pick. It walks straight into the locker room. It changes the rotation math. It puts veterans, young players, and contracts on the same table. And that is where the conversation gets a lot less comfortable. Because if Mack, Tuli, and Mesidor are the top of the room, somebody lower on the depth chart has to fight for oxygen. And right here, I have no interest in sugarcoating it. Bud Dupree is in danger. Dupree has a real NFL career. He has a name. He has had useful moments with the Chargers. Nobody has to pretend he has been dead weight. But a roster built to win cannot become a museum of resumes. It has to be a tool. It has to be productive snaps. It has to be special teams value, flexibility, future upside, and cost all making sense at the same time. And when you put Dupree against Kyle Kennard at the bottom of the edge room, the read gets rough for the veteran. Kennard barely did anything as a rookie, and I know that frustrates people. Fans look at a 2025 fourth-rounder with no impact and think, just cut bait and move on. But that is the easy reaction. The smarter franchise reaction is different. Kennard is still young. He still has development ahead. He can still be shaped. He is still cheap and controllable. If you try to hide that kind of player on the practice squad, you might lose him. The Chargers already felt that risk with Caleb Murphy. You cannot play around with young depth when this roster needs to get more athletic, cheaper, and more sustainable. Dupree, meanwhile, is in the final year of his deal. If he is released after June 1, he leaves around $1.25 million in dead cap and opens up just under $2.5 million in space. That is not some league-shaking amount, but it is space. And space matters when the team still has other areas to attack, when the offensive line is still on the radar, and when every roster tweak can turn into ammo later. And here's the part a lot of people skip right past. The fourth edge rusher has to help on special teams. It is not glamorous. It is roster survival. Dupree played only 114 special team snaps over the last 2 seasons with the Chargers, about 20% of the team's snaps in that phase. At this stage of his career, he is not the profile you want chasing returns, covering grass, and throwing his body around for a secondary role. Kennard is not a guarantee there either, but the physical upside and natural willingness of a young player matter. So do I expect competition in camp? Of course. Harbaugh is not handing out roster spots because of internet arguments. Dupree will get his chance to prove he can still change games. But when you look at direction, contract, age, role, and roster construction, the path already looks tight for him. Mesidor arrived as a reinforcement. For Dupree, he may have arrived as a warning. And just when you think draft night is only about the defense, Arizona drops a piece on the board that could spill into Los Angeles in a very interesting way. The Cardinals took Jeremiah Love with the 3rd overall pick. A running back going that high immediately changes the hierarchy of that room. And when that happens, James Conner's name starts to feel too heavy to just sit there in the corner with nobody looking. Now think about this with cold logic and competitive anger at the same time. The Chargers already have Omarion Hampton as the future bet. They brought in Keaton Mitchell, pure speed, the kind of player who changes angles and forces linebackers to run sideways. So on paper, the room is not empty. But a Jim Harbaugh team never looks at running backs like decoration. It looks at them as identity, as punishment, as a way to lower the shoulder and tell the other defense this game is going to hurt for 4 quarters. That is why James Conner as a possible trade target cannot be laughed off. The guy is a 2-time Pro Bowler. He has 2 1,000-yard seasons on his resume. And his brand is exactly what fits heavy football. Contact, strong legs, dirty yards, veteran presence. He would not come in to erase Hampton. That read is too small. He would come in to keep Hampton from carrying the whole thing too early, to give the offense a short-term piece that helps Herbert without turning every drive into quarterback hero ball. The question is price. It always is. If Arizona really starts taking calls, the Chargers cannot act desperate. You do not burn important capital on a veteran running back when the offensive line still needs answers and other positions are still asking for attention. But if the market drops, if the value gets smart, if this becomes one of those post-draft opportunities where a team needs to reorganize its roster, Ortiz has to at least make the call, not to make noise, to measure leverage. And I know part of the fan base will say, another running back? Yes, another running back if the plan is to crush the clock, protect Herbert, close games, and turn physical advantage into a signature. Harbaugh does not want an offense that only looks pretty in highlights. He wants an offense that wears defenses down. Conner could be that second hammer, as long as the price is right. So tell me in the comments, no sitting on the fence, would you make a cheap trade for James Conner to speed up this physical offense, or would you let Hampton and Mitchell grow without a veteran taking space? Because that answer says exactly what kind of Chargers team you want to see in 2026. At the end of the day, the message is this. The Chargers are not building a roster to please impatient fan spreadsheets. They are trying to build a team that is tougher, deeper, and harder to break. Mesidor brings pressure. The offensive line still demands an answer. Dupree might be watching his roster spot slip away, and James Conner, if he becomes a cheap opportunity, fits way too well with the idea of hitting first and hitting last. Now they cannot sleep through day 2 of the draft. Ortiz started strong, but he has to finish the job. If you want to follow this fight pick by pick, subscribe, hit the like button, and stay right here. Bolt up.